The New Jersey Turnpike. In this day and age, it's one of the busiest toll roads in the world. The Turnpike carries heavy traffic through the bustling and busy Newark Basin. But in another day and age, 200 million years ago, the basin carried lots of traffic too. Traffic of a prehistoric kind.
If you were standing in the middle of the Newark Basin, which is one of these giant rift valleys, what you might see looking off to the east would be a vast lake, 40, 50 miles across. You couldn't see the ends of it looking north and south, as big as Lake Erie. If you look to the west, you'd see a giant fault scarp and mountains rising up thousands of feet above the basin floor. The mountains themselves, when the lake existed, were probably clothed in conifers, things that look like evergreens. The basin floor itself would have patches of green and patches of brown where there are exposed mud flats. Along the mud flats, there'd be thousands of small dinosaurs roaming along the edges, picking up bits of plants or chasing after prey. You'd see small crocodiles, maybe 3-4 feet in length. Not like modern crocodiles that are aquatic, but terrestrial crocodiles with long, skinny legs, built almost like greyhounds. Then there'd be small dinosaurs, turkey-sized things, thousands of them, running along the lake shores, leaving their footprints, which we find here, of course. There'd be larger forms chasing after them, things that look something like miniature Tyrannosaurus or miniature Allosaurus with longer necks and smaller teeth and smaller claws. And then a host of very small lizards and things in among the bushes and trees. There would be no giants at all, like we're familiar with in the later Mesozoic and like what you see out west. Instead, they'd all be relatively small forms, probably not many things standing taller than a human being at the hip height.
The dinosaur world that Paul Olson studies is much different from today's Cenozoic or modern world, which started only 65 million years ago, about the time the last of the dinosaurs died. That was at a point geologists call the KT boundary, short for Cretaceous Tertiary. But if we take our geologic clock back 100 million years, we land in the Cretaceous period, a hotter and wetter world where dinosaurs flourished. If we go back 145 million years, we'll be in the Jurassic period, the so-called golden age of dinosaurs, when the big giants roamed the earth. And then back 210 million years, the Triassic period, where early dinosaurs inhabited a world where real estate amounted to one giant landmass, eons before the continents we know formed. When he was a teenager, Paul Olson and a friend went hiking through Newark Basin woodlands, intending to dig for dinosaurs. 21 years and a geology doctorate later, Olson continues to dig and discover.
The most important thing about the Newark Basin is that because of the record of fossil lakes within the sediments, we have a handle on time. On time in a way that's not normal for geologists. We're able to look at time spans routinely on the order of 20,000 years, when most geologists are concerned with time spans of the scale of millions of years. So we're able to look at changes in animal and plant life that occur through millions of years, but on a very fine time scale. So we can distinguish whether the changes are catastrophic or gradual. In most places, you can't tell. There could be 1 million years and a couple of meters of sediment.
So the Newark Basin is literally a geological microscope.
Yes, that's a very good analogy. It has built within it a chronometer, a timepiece, which measures off geological time in thousands of years instead of millions of years. Yet the whole basin has a record which spans 40 million years.
Yet for reasons science still doesn't understand, Olson's hammer never finds bone, perhaps because conditions there don't preserve prehistoric bone well. But those conditions do preserve footprints. The evidence Olson found is helping science change the way it understands what dinosaurs were like and how they lived. At his Lamont Doherty Research Laboratory in New York State, Olson puts 200-million-year-old fossils through modern technology. By converting photographs into electronic images, Olson lets his computer compare one footprint to another. The display allows him to follow dinosaurs from baby to adult. This computer analysis helps clear up confusion that's mistaken juvenile or teenage dinosaurs as creatures from another species when they're actually from the same family. It's also shedding new light on what dinosaurs were really like.
From tracks, which are, of course, the only true record we have of living, breathing dinosaurs, we can tell who they met during the day, what other kinds of animals walked alongside them, whether they were herding or not, whether they chased other kinds of animals, whether they took care of their young. There are some trackways that have a large form and smaller versions of the same thing surrounding it, all going in the same direction. That's a possible example of a mother and her young. There are many things we can learn specifically about the way dinosaurs move from tracks that we can never learn from the bones alone.
The place where most people learn about dinosaurs is in museums.
I always say that if dinosaurs hadn't existed, we would have had to invent them. In fact, I say that we did invent them, in as much as that there's apparently always been a human fascination with fantastic creatures.
Museums exhibit dinosaur reality, yet the dinosaur image that remains in most people's minds is the one that Hollywood often distorts.
Thing's got more armor than a tank.
Dinosaurs were big. Some of them were tiny, the size of chickens. Some of them were the size of 4-story buildings. Some of them ate meat. Some of them ate vegetables. It's that variety and the fact that they existed for 150 million years, that they went extinct for reasons we don't quite understand. All of these factors combine to make dinosaur mania what it is today, a retail and educational phenomenon.
From the dinosaurs of Hollywood, we get the dinosaurs of Madison Avenue. Merchandisers have brought dinosaurs out of extinction and into pop culture.
Maybe next spring we'll find this piece that's left for the dinosaur over there. But I bet they can tell what kind of dinosaur it is, even without the piece that's missing. Okay, everybody go to your...
They've also given teachers and museums some fun ways to excite lesson plans.
All three of them can very easily fit in the jaw of Tyrannosaurus Rex. And in the skull of that big bully was a brain about this big. So boys and girls, do you think you could outsmart Tyrannosaurus Rex? I should hope so.
But just mention dinosaurs to children and you're guaranteed excitement.
Wow! What all the zoos in the world wouldn't give for these reptiles!
Television and Hollywood portrayal of dinosaurs often takes liberty with scientific fact. Children's cartoon shows make heavy use of dinosaurs, but many of the creatures kids see roaming together actually lived millions of years apart.
It's the tyrant!
Oh, the tyrant! Stop! Wait a minute! I haven't taken any pictures yet!
There'll be a special children's program at 3:30 upstairs.
At Dinosaur National Monument in Utah, scientists try to set the record straight. Visitors don't see dinosaurs the Hollywood way, they see them nature's way.
Back when I grew up, and I'm sure when a lot of the other people here grew up, they learned that dinosaurs were very stupid animals. They had green and grays, and they slumbered around by themselves, ate their food, lived their life, and died, right? Dinosaurs were probably a lot more complicated than what we think.
I think Hollywood prefers it that way simply because it makes a better story. I mean, you can't have a very interesting story if all you have are dinosaurs stomping around in the forest, chasing each other. You got to have Raquel Welch there. You got to show some skin. It sells.
Our exhibits really focus on the main quarry here and the animals that were buried in it. And in that sense, we try to set the record straight in terms of talking about them as living organisms that have a biology that is somewhat understandable and lived in an environment that, while different than the present-day environment, may in fact be much different than the environment that visitors typically expect to see dinosaurs occurring in.
Part of the problem is that image has changed with time. Early paleontologists made mistakes. Dinosaurs were named twice, given the wrong name, put together with wrong bones, wrong heads, and in one celebrated case, pioneer paleontologist Edward Drinker Cope put the head on the wrong end of this plesiosaur.
It was a brand new field. These were amazingly fantastic animals, you know, unknown, undreamt of. And they were trying to describe it first. They were trying to describe the most things, the newest things, the most dramatic things, and Cope just made a mistake.
The dinosaurs roamed the world for 150 million years, the most successful creatures that ever walked the earth. Now, by contrast, man, whose mere 4 million years on this planet is barely a blink of an eye, really only started to unravel the dinosaurs' mystery about 200 years ago. And history tells us that some of the most important unraveling occurred on some rural land in New Jersey.
Right in the historic suburban town of Haddonfield.
It was here in the late summer and early fall of 1858 that John Hopkins informed William Parker Folke, gentleman naturalist summering in Haddonfield, about the discovery of some bones on his property some 20 years previously. On this occasion, William Parker Folke grew very, very excited and asked John Hopkins for permission to dig up these old bones and see if he could assemble them and take them back to Philadelphia. Well, in a wonderful Victorian turn of phrase, with prompt liberality, John Hopkins granted William Parker Folke permission to dig anywhere he wished on his property.
They dug here at this site, at that time a marl pit. In those days, marl mining was big business, used widely for fertilizer. What Folk found was about 40 bones from a hadrosaurus dinosaur, later named Hadrosaurus folki after its founder. Hadrosaurus folki was a medium-sized duckbill about 30 feet long and 12 feet tall, about as tall as an elephant, but 1.5 times as long. Scientists think scavengers raided many of his remains, but the bones that were left changed history.
Basically, the importance of Hadrosaurus folki was that for the first time, a relatively complete skeleton had been found that could give us a picture of how dinosaurs actually looked when they were living. Previously to that, only bits and pieces were known from England and continental Europe and a few bits and pieces from the American West, the isolated bone, piece of tooth. But here we had some 40 bones which were capable of being reconstructed into some kind of reasonable facsimile of what the animal looked like when it was alive. And from these bones, what Dr. Leidy determined was that dinosaurs, or at least Hadrosaurus, were capable of rearing back on their hind legs and standing in a somewhat semi-erect fashion. And the reason he knew this was because of the disparity in the length between the femur, the thigh bone, and the humerus, or upper arm bone. Previously, all dinosaurs had been depicted as lumbering, four-footed, elephantine-type lizards. But Leidy's view was a radically new conception of the dinosaurs that at its time was somewhat novel and radical, because you have to remember that what he was suggesting here is that these things were walking about on their hind limbs like human beings. And this was only a year after the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species.
Folk's find set off a search for other bones all over southern New Jersey. Joseph Leidy and his prodigy Edward Drinker Cope systematically dug up other marl pits for prehistoric remains. Word of Cope's search got out. Among those listening was another paleontologist named Othniel Charles Marsh. Cope had been sending his finds to Philadelphia's Academy of Natural Sciences, but Marsh, knowing the value and prestige at stake, had other ideas.
It was after Cope showed Marsh around all these pits that the dinosaur bones stopped flowing through Haddonfield and into the Philadelphia Academy and suddenly took a turn north and all went to Yale instead.
By the 1870s, Cope and Marsh got word of even more fertile dinosaur land.
Back in the 19th century, the popular phrase was, "Go west, young man." For some prospectors, going west meant hunting for gold. But for the early paleontologists, it meant hunting for bones. Big ones. It was here in Morrison, Colorado, where science found the first evidence that huge creatures once roamed the earth, like these petrified remains of the giant brontosaur. The discovery triggered lots of excitement and professional rivalry. Rivalry that's come to be known as the Bone Wars.
Showers high near 85.
Right now in Cheyenne, it's 53, Laramie 46. Sunny and warm, expect a high around 85.
Brent Breithaupt is collections manager for the Geology Museum at the University of Wyoming. He enjoys showing visitors around Como Bluff, an historic paleontological site where the bone wars reached their greatest intensity and where some of the first large complete dinosaurs were unearthed.
You definitely were a hardy breed, just as the early ranchers out here came out here to bring their stock out here. Just these gentlemen were living off the land. They were getting most of the game. There was a lot more game at that time. There was antelope and buffalo abundant in the area, and so they were sort of the cowboys, if you will, of paleontology out here, the frontiersmen of paleontology. So many of the Wild West stories that we see perhaps portrayed on television and the movies, that was contemporaneous with early fossil collectors here back at the end of the 1800s.
There's rumors of instances where crates of bones, where shipping labels were changed so that they would go to the rival collector. There was quite a bit of spying in the field. In other words, Cope's crews would be lurking on over the ridge. You can just imagine them watching over the ridge to see what Marsh's crews were collecting, and vice versa, to see what was being found. And they'd write back to their bosses back east and say, Cope's crews have found this material. They've opened up a new quarry, and this is being found there. They'd write back that occasionally they'd come back in the evenings and perhaps fill in the quarries so that it would require more work for the material to be collected. There's even some instances of in the quarries that were off in the distance that the bones were destroyed, were smashed up and destroyed so that rival collecting crews wouldn't find them.
What was found out west captured the attention of early paleontology. These were big bones that museums would compete for, finds that would help unravel some giant mysteries.
Scientists throughout the world had a very limited understanding of dinosaurs. They had found fragmented dinosaur material. They knew that there were a race of extinct beasts that lived at one time, but they really didn't have a good understanding for what these animals were like. When they came out here, scientists were able to find for the first time, and especially at Como Bluff, virtually complete skeletons of animals that were 70 feet long, 30 or 40 tons, that were unlike anything else that we have in the world. So the first description of something that was known as the thunder lizard brontosaurus was found at Quarry 10.
But it isn't surprising that scientists didn't know much about these creatures. Often dinosaur bones look more like rocks. At the Wagner Free Institute in Philadelphia, the collection of old bones is also a collection of history, showing how early science made mistakes.
This is very similar to exactly what you would find if you went out west and looked at the ground. They haven't painted it, they haven't made plaster casts of this. This is the real fossil rock. And you're right, a lot of people didn't recognize them for bones. They just thought they were rocks.
But Leidy knew what he was talking about.
Leidy was one of the first to actually recognize that these weren't giant humans, these weren't giant elephants, that they were a unique species.
Geologist Martin Lockley has returned to the birthplace of the bone wars to study evidence that may have long gone overlooked.
And the animal was walking along at a time when this was the surface, and as it did so, its huge weight made a big indentation in this strata.
If Lockley is right, and his ideas are controversial, then the petrified footprints he found were left about 140 million years ago by the giant apatosaur, or what used to be called the brontosaur, a dinosaur that was 60 feet long. But the apatosaur is not the only creature to leave its mark in the rocks. The University of Colorado has preserved one slope in which dinosaur footprints stand out so clearly, it's almost like dinosaurs just lumbered through.
What we see here is a large three-toed footprint of an iguanodon type of dinosaur. This would be its back left foot, and this would be its front left foot, then the back right foot, the front right foot, the next left and front, the next right and front, and so on.
It may seem hard to believe, but 100 million years ago, this steep slope of the Rocky Mountains was a flat beach. Dinosaurs roamed here by the thousands. In fact, scientists have recently nicknamed this ridge the Dinosaur Freeway. And within these prehistoric rocks is compelling evidence of how that freeway once looked. The rippled sandstone looks like the ripples we see on today's beaches because that's just what they are, or were, 100 million years ago. Their petrified remains are now left for science to study.
When we have evidence like these ripple marks, we can tell which way the currents were flowing, we can tell the configuration of the shoreline, and so forth, and reconstruct the activity of the animals from their footprints in the context of the ancient environment in which they lived.
Scientists are also finding that footprints can give some insight into dinosaur population. How many small ones, how many large ones, and also the relationship of predator to prey.
We can also use it in applied geology. We find that we can correlate layers of strata from one area to another using footprints where we never thought this was possible before. And as it has been a neglected science, I think we're going to continue to find new applications for dinosaur footprints in our understanding of the ancient world.
Underneath Montana's big sky, the ancient world is telling a new story. A remote hillside near Shoto is drawing paleontologists from around the world to see and understand what's now called Egg Mountain.
Now, as you see behind me, it's really not much of a mountain. It's not much of a hill, really. But if you think about the information that we've gained from the bones and eggs that we've found here, it certainly is a tremendous amount of knowledge, and it is kind of like a Mount Everest worth of information for dinosaur paleontology.
Egg Mountain was found thanks to a rather unlikely individual named Marion Brandvold. As many would-be paleontologists, she liked going out looking for dinosaur bones. One day, she was walking in the Badlands, so-called because they can't grow anything, but for paleontologists, they're rich in bones. She and her son found one large and some smaller bones. She had them on display in her rock shop when word got out to a dinosaur research team led by Princeton paleontologist Jack Horner.
I showed them these bones, and Jack says to Bob, he says, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Bob says, yes, I know what you're thinking. Baby dinosaur.
That's when Horner returned to his western roots and started digging. He found a site where two different dinosaurs coexisted. On Egg Mountain, Horner and his workers found the eggs containing actual dinosaur embryos and nests of Orodromeus macula, a plant-eating dinosaur.
Well, I'd say the biggest finding is probably the littlest finding, the embryos. Dinosaur embryos had not been found prior to the discoveries on Egg Mountain. And dinosaur embryos, or embryos of any kind of animal, give us a lot of information about the growth of the animal and how it grows up, and probably tells us more about the behavior of the animal than anything else does.
And not far away in the Badlands, he found more of the bones that Brandvold found. Maiasaura peeblesora, meaning mother lizard. In this case, mother dinosaurs and their babies. The fact that mothers and baby dinosaurs were found together really intrigued these paleontologists who thought they found a key to understanding dinosaur behavior.
For 100 years, people have been collecting dinosaurs to put in museums just to wow the general public. They've gone out and they've looked for giant dinosaurs. They've looked for things that they could put up to entice people to come into their museum. And they weren't really very interested in the behavior of the animals as living animals. Within the last 10 or 15 years, we've started to look into this behavior problem. And for us, or at least for some of us, it's more important to find out how they behaved rather than just to find the bones and to identify a new type of animal.
A new way of thinking from the bone war days of Cope and Marsh. What paleontologists have found at Egg Mountain tells us something about dinosaur sociology.
We think that we know that there is some sort of parenting going on, some behavior that would help to feed the infants, and I would guess the infants would potentially be able to learn from that, be able to figure out what food is and what material is not food.
And people usually tend to think that maternal instinct is just within the mammals and not because the reptiles they see, the turtles that will lay their eggs and leave them and not take care of them. But then you also see the alligators when they're swimming around, maybe you've seen with the baby in their mouth, moving it around and protecting their nests. And these dinosaurs here in these badlands protected their nests.
It was startling information because it was new information, but now that we know that dinosaurs are closely related to birds, it isn't that, I mean, there's nothing surprising about it. Most of the work that I'm doing now, I mean, I still continue to collect dinosaur nests and babies and things like that to learn something about dinosaur behavior, but I'm also interested in dinosaur evolution and the habitats that they lived in through time. In other words, looking at the evolution of their behavior, of their ecology, and their morphology.
Montana's Museum of the Rockies, where Horner runs the vertebrate paleontology department, has turned his Egg Mountain from a scientific success into a commercial one, too. Would-be paleontologists pay to spend a day or a week learning to and actually digging up bones. Among those who came to learn were a stockbroker and an electrical engineer from New Jersey. Their studies paid off in discovery.
From what I understand, this is one of the hip bones of the dinosaur. I think, what is it? What do you say? Ilium? Ischium. Or Myosaurus. This morning, Ron's the one that found it yesterday. This much was sticking out, and we've excavated all of this.
Yeah, actually, it was just from here down. All that stuff is what you see right down here. And it's about what it looks like, except for some of the harder pieces that are right here.
You guys have come out on these trips before to come out and dig for dinosaurs?
No, this is my first time.
First trip.
First trip, you hit the jackpot.
There are so many dinosaurs buried here you can't miss.
Yeah. I'm a complete amateur, so I really didn't know too much about it, other than reading some of the material. And in a couple of days, they could sharpen your eyes so you knew what to look for and what questions to ask, and then where to dig. And as you can see, not only here, but a couple other places right down the ravine, they've made some very good finds just by walking around and seeing small items sticking out. You never really know what's at the end of it. You could just pull it out, and it just could be a small bone like this. On the other hand, you could end up with something like this, and we're very lucky.
So was this 16-year-old boy. While leaning against rocks on Egg Mountain, he saw something he thought might be significant. It was.
This is the first time an egg has been found in place on Egg Mountain since 1984. And you're the first person to find it. How's that make you feel?
Eggshell is everywhere, but a complete egg in place on Egg Mountain is a real find, something that teenager won't soon forget.
What we have here are thousands and thousands of dinosaurs that were at one time together. You don't usually picture that if you've seen any of the old movies. You see the lone creature out there, you know, maybe the big T-Rex biting on the neck of a Triceratops. Here we're seeing large herds that travel together. We have 5 different sizes of these Maiasaurus that travel together. We have mothers feeding crippled babies in nests. We have things that we've never found before. Even with just the eggshell, if there was a nest with 15 babies being fed, there's got to be a very large food source very close by. You can imagine the sound would be real great. You'd have the babies crying out, you'd have the mothers answering.
The Museum of the Rockies is one of the richest and newest collections of dinosaur bones. It has an ideal location near one of the most productive dig sites. Ken Carpenter uses a surgeon's skill to recreate dinosaur life.
Well, for me, the whole thing is to take the skeletons and essentially breathe life into them. They were living animals, and it's necessary to view them as living animals. And if you look at the skeletons that I've assembled for display, a lot of it has been in order to make the animals look alive, make it more interesting for the visitor.
Carpenter has to infer the way the dinosaurs looked and behaved. A lot of his work is subjective, but his skill provides provocative insight. Many museums don't display actual bones. Instead, they use models, then keep the real ones locked away for safekeeping. But just how do those bones get from the dig sites to the museum? You just can't pick them up and carry them away. After millions of years in the ground, the bones are brittle and they have to be protected. That's where paleontology and arts and crafts mix to safely remove the bones.
These things are great because you could throw a few of these in your pack and you're essentially complete. You know, you get your canteen of water, and when you find something like this, you
take it out the same day.
Right.
The more traditional way of doing this is to cut strips of burlap and to mix plaster of Paris, soak the burlap in plaster of Paris, and then wrap with that. Just a little bit more difficult to carry plaster of Paris around with you. If we had a really big bone, that's what we'd be doing. We'd come out here with plaster of Paris and plenty of burlap sacks and have to slice them up and all the rest. So this is a real time saver.
In Alberta, Canada, they found bones so large they can't take them away by hand. They have to be hoisted and then flown away by helicopter. Those bones wind up at the Tyrrell Museum, one of the world's newest and most advanced centers for paleontology. The curious and experienced come here from around the world. But before the bones go on display, they have to go through David Fisk first. He spends his time chipping through time, extracting prehistoric bones sealed in rocks for millions of years. It's an expensive process. It can cost up to $300,000 to extract a whole skeleton. It also takes a lot of skill. Fisk may spend weeks before he can turn this jacketed stone into the skeleton of the Tyrannosaurus rex it once was.
This animal was a large carnivore, lived about the late Cretaceous, about 65, 70 million years ago, and was found in 1981 by some high school students just out for a walk in the Badlands, and they called us up in Edmonton at the time, and we came down and excavated it the following year.
As T-Rex goes, how big is this thing?
This is an animal that was very large by comparison to people today, likely stood about 13, 14 feet at the hips, but as itself was likely a juvenile compared to some of the other ones we found around North America. It's about a quarter smaller than the major ones found in the United States. The block you see right here was approximately 2,500 pounds when it first came in the door. It's been chipped down quite a bit now. The original specimen altogether, we brought back 27,000 pounds of rock with the bone still embedded inside it. That's the best way to preserve the bone, to get it back to the laboratory where we can control the processes that we're going to use to construct it back to its original shape. As you can see, a lot of the rock itself is chipped and broken and cracked, and we've been applying various materials such as wax and plaster to stop those cracks from breaking up anymore. Later on, an artist will repair these breaks here bit by bit, bring it back to its original shape, and it'll then go into our collections for scientific research. We've got a long way to go before we fully understand what these animals were like. The more we find about them, what little we do know, the more complex we find the animals to be, and they're exciting animals, exciting field to be involved in.
For 6 years, the University of Pennsylvania and the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia have worked this site near Harlowtown, Montana. They've acquired between 4,000 to 5,000 specimens each year. To the untrained eye, one find would pass for another, but it was such a thrilling discovery for Ted Deschler that it made his whole summer.
We're putting together a more complete picture of all the animals that lived during the time of dinosaurs. Very included among those, and very interesting to us, are the mammals which were alive during the age of dinosaurs. And we made an exceptional find this morning. What you see there is the jaw of a mammal. The mammals were very small during this time period. Probably sort of insignificant parts of the fauna there. When the dinosaurs disappeared, the mammals then began to diversify, lead to the great variety of mammals that we know today.
Well, Hollywood might give you the wrong idea, but the fact is, man never saw a live dinosaur. The dinosaurs were gone for 63 million years before man ever even evolved. Some small mammals, though, did live with the dinosaur, but after the dinosaurs vanished, it only took 10 million years for mammals to explode into all shapes and sizes.
Mammals were around from the very time of the very earliest dinosaurs to their time of extinction, but they never did anything until the dinosaurs were wiped out. So from the beginning of the age of dinosaurs to the end, mammals were suppressed by dinosaurs. Why they were suppressed, why the dinosaurs could do this when they were very small, is a tremendous mystery. And locked in these rocks are clues to the solution of that mystery.
Back in New Jersey, paleontologists are working two sites which are yielding very important clues. Through a grant from the National Geographic Society, the New Jersey State Museum is digging up a watery hillside near Ellisdale. It was discovered, as many dinosaur finds have been, by an amateur, Robert Denton, a chemist at Johnson & Johnson by profession, a paleontologist at heart.
I didn't come out to the field or come to Ellisdale here to find the world's best dinosaur site, or the East's most productive dinosaur site, as the place has been called. Basically, I was just looking for an equivalent to sites that have been discovered in primarily Delaware.
At first, Denton and his co-worker, Bob O'Neill, found only a few bits and pieces of fossils. But after a heavy rainstorm in 1984, Denton found something very different.
We had, about 7 inches of rain in 24 hours, and this whole place just was blown out. It was giant. There was waves coming through here. It was a tremendous amount of water. And what happened was, after the waters receded, Bob and I came here, and we started looking around. And now we weren't finding 1 or 2 pieces of bone. We were just completely shocked. There was areas, especially upstream, where the entire stream bed was littered with bone. It wasn't a few isolated pieces anymore. We were carrying the bones out. We filled our pockets. I think I took my jean jacket off and I was putting bones in it like a little basket.
They unearthed a veritable wonderland of something called scrap faunas, fossilized bones, bits and pieces. The fossils found there lived 10 to 15 million years before the mass extinction of the dinosaurs. National Geographic was interested in the site because so many different faunas turned up. Marine and non-marine fossils were found there, something considered quite rare in one site.
This was the heyday of that period, of the so-called Cretaceous, which was the last period of the dinosaur age. And there was a tremendous diversity of animals, and the extinction was not quite coming up yet. The other thing we've learned is, just by counting up the bones and looking how many ones we have from the ocean and how many we have that are land-dwelling creatures, terrestrial animals, we can tell that this site was actually quite landward. It's close to the land, if not right on the edge of the mainland, because there are a lot of land-dwelling animals here, or animals that lived both in land and water, like crocodiles.
Creatures like crocodiles and alligators are important, paleontologists say, because they, unlike dinosaurs, are not extinct. Instead, they're still around for scientists to study.
And that's really where you start to make important connections, because you can then say, well, how did things change? How were they the same? And how does that impact on the way things are going today?
And we're finally seeing a much more complete scene of dinosaur paleontology, an entire faunal study, indeed an entire geologic study. A study that looks not only at the big spectacular bones, but some of the minutiae, some of the more subtle and sophisticated aspects of paleontology, the sediments as well as the bones.
These faunas, because of the nature of the bones, that they're pieces or little bits, are referred to as scrap faunas. Paleontologists very often look down their noses at them. They're very difficult to interpret. You have a very hard time trying to figure out what kind of animals you have when you only find 1 or 2 bones. But the thing is that lack of knowledge makes the scrap faunas not only intriguing, but the lack of knowledge about them is any site like this, where you can get good in-depth information about the occurrence of the specimens, becomes extremely important.
Scientists think this site was probably a bay or a lagoon, and compare the scrap faunas found to driftwood, shells, and bones that we might find at the shore today. These scrap faunas differ dramatically from the fossils out west where the big bones are found. The lure of those big bones shifted the focus away from New Jersey in the late 1800s, but scientists say interest may be coming back to the Garden State.
It's taken a major development in the sophistication of collecting techniques to bring things back here, where we can now look at these scrap faunas and these less spectacular materials in the scientific light that they deserve.
But how can paleontologists interest the public in these important yet physically unimpressive finds?
We will try to bring public attention to some of the minutiae. I think in some respects it is very exciting to think that mammals, the group to which we ourselves belong, were actually alive at the same time as the dinosaurs. I can't imagine that people wouldn't be interested in seeing what kind of mammals were alive in the shadow, so to speak, of a dinosaur.
This is what science calls the KT boundary. The thin line between this light and dark-colored soil marks the end of the prehistoric Earth and the beginning of the modern Earth that evolved into what we know today. It also marks off the end of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. Now, science isn't quite sure what caused that end, whether it was from a change in the Earth's geology or a cooling down of the climate. But one theory holds that the end came not from the Earth, but from outer space, a theory that remains controversial.
Some scientists trace the dinosaurs' extinction to a huge prehistoric asteroid. The theory started when scientists at the University of California at Berkeley found a 65-million-year-old sediment rich in iridium, an element rare on Earth but common in outer space. The theory suggests an asteroid struck the Earth, unfurling dust clouds, igniting wildfires, filling the sky with soot, blocking the sun, and cooling the Earth's climate. The best present-day analogy would be the summer of 1988 fires at Yellowstone National Park. But the fires of 65 million years ago, scientists believe, were even more devastating. And after the fire hit, the dinosaurs and an estimated 60 to 80% of animal species alive were no more. At the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Doctors Penelope Boston and Starley Thompson have been studying whether the asteroid theory is plausible. Using computer animation, Dr. Thompson has analyzed what would happen if a 10-kilometer meteorite were to slam into the American Midwest.
What you first will see is an asteroid impact in Iowa, which produces a lot of nitrogen oxides. The nitrogen oxides enter the stratosphere over North America and will form a hole in the ozone layer, initially over North America, and that hole will then move around the northern hemisphere and get larger as the nitrogen oxides spread out. Eventually, the ozone hole is largest over the whole equatorial area and moves on down into the southern hemisphere.
Why is this, what we're looking at, a good demonstration of what happened to the dinosaurs?
Well, nobody knows how ultraviolet resistant the dinosaurs were. And certainly it's one of the additional impacts to the environment that had not really been previously considered. This is a very small bolide, a 2-kilometer diameter bolide. It has much, much less energy than the hypothetical asteroid that hit at the KT boundary. This asteroid eliminates global ozone to the tune of about 50%. A 10-kilometer diameter asteroid, which I've also simulated, eliminates about 99% of the stratospheric ozone. That's what is hypothesized to have hit at the KT boundary 65 million years ago.
It's really a statistical number game. There are lots of these objects out in the solar system, and it would be highly unlikely for us not to impact them at reasonable intervals. The smaller ones may have caused regional extinctions, have caused regional effects. Something the size of what we imagine for the KT bolide would have caused global effects. So in retrospect, it's hard to imagine that Earth would not have experienced this. I'm not entirely convinced yet, just because I think it's the nature of scientists to try to be cautious in their work. But I think that the evidence is mounting and has been mounting since 1980, when this first started to really be considered with the Alvarez impact scenario. and the iridium anomaly evidence at the Cretaceous-Tertiary boundary. I think one of the pieces that's missing in a lot of people's mind is the absence so far of a crater that can be immediately tied to the Cretaceous event. To me, this doesn't seem quite as important, perhaps, as it does to some geologists, because the fact that the Earth is covered with so much water seems to me that this could have easily been subducted and not be present anymore. In terms of the fossil evidence from deep-sea drilling cores, I think the evidence is overwhelming that there was a massive event and that it was very short in duration. It was not probably something that took place over many thousands or millions of years.
But did this really account for the extinction of dinosaurs? My position is that it claims too much, because yes, dinosaurs became extinct, and yes, many creatures in the sea became extinct as well. But when paleontologists really look at the details of the fossil record, we see a very mixed pattern. We see some creatures which became extinct very suddenly. Certain microscopic organisms in the sea appeared to become extinct very suddenly. But we see other kinds of organisms, certain types of clams and coiled mollusks and creatures like that, which apparently dwindled over a period of 500,000 or 1 million or even 3 million years, almost as if they looked up into the sky past the reaches of the solar system and saw something coming and decided to croak. Well, that doesn't make sense. Organisms can't anticipate the catastrophe.
Discoveries at the Inversand pit near Sewell, New Jersey, make some scientists question the asteroid impact theory. The Inversand pit is typical of all KT boundary sites that mark the end of the dinosaur. It is, in a sense, a dinosaur junkyard. Both at the point of extinction and just below it, no complete dinosaur skeletons have ever been found. Instead, all that's turned up are bits and pieces.
Even in these marine deposits where dinosaurs are rare, we do find dinosaur bones, and they are here at the base of this pit. They do not make it up to this level, and in places like Montana, for example, there are no good dinosaur skeletons higher than 2 meters below the iridium level, which is supposed to be the remnants of the asteroid impact.
So what's the significance of that?
The significance of that is that the dinosaurs may have already been on the decline well before the very end. And in fact, there may have been climatic changes, oceanographic changes, and other kinds of changes in the atmospheric composition that related to things like extensive worldwide volcanism, volcanoes going off in great numbers around the world, a sort of coup de grace in which you had, the way I like to put it, things were bad and then they got much worse. For 100 million years, it had been a very good time to be a dinosaur. And then all of a sudden, there was some very bad luck. So I think that while we can argue whether it was either gradual change or catastrophic change, it may be better to think about both things co-occurring.
Like most paleontologists, I believe that it was the final extinction of dinosaurs was a result of multiple factors, many of them involving climate. And I will only half facetiously suggest one possible outcome of changing climates. And that is based on a recent discovery concerning the reproductive biology of many living reptiles, including turtles, crocodiles, a few lizards, possibly a few snakes as well. And that is that for these reptiles, modern reptiles, the determination of the sex of the offspring is based not on the chromosomes, as we're familiar with for mammals, but rather on the temperature of the eggs in the nest. And depending on the temperature during the incubation of the eggs, the offspring may be 100% male or 100% female. And so if you see that climates were cooling at the end of the Cretaceous, that this may have affected the sex ratio of the offspring, such that the last dinosaurs on Earth may have been disappointed males.
But the mass extinction that took place 65 million years ago was not the first mass extinction and may not be the last. There's evidence that a number of mass extinctions have taken place since the fossil record of animals began 800 million years ago. One such mass extinction may have opened the way for dinosaurs to thrive. It may have happened 200 million years ago when a giant meteor slammed into Canada, leaving a crater still visible today called Manakaugan.
It left the mammals, it left small dinosaurs, it left lizards, and turtles, and frogs, and salamanders, and they took over. And the dinosaurs were evidently the forms which were most successful in the new world left by that catastrophe.
There's one aspect of dinosaurs which tends to stick in people's minds, and that is that dinosaurs are extinct. But the lesson from that is a misleading lesson, because what is important about dinosaurs is not that they are extinct now, because 99% of all creatures that have ever lived are extinct now. And there's little doubt that we ourselves will be extinct a few million years from now, hopefully replaced by a superior descendant. But what is important about dinosaurs is that they live so very long and so very successfully.
Canada's Tyrrell Museum operates this greenhouse where they grow prehistoric plant life. Now in here you find a hot, steamy, tropical climate, the conditions that gave rise to these plants, and the dinosaurs that often ate them. Now most scientists agree, for reasons still unknown, the prehistoric climate started to change and the dinosaurs struggled to survive. Now if that scenario sounds familiar, it should.
The drop in temperature during the last ice age occurred over literally thousands of years, whereas the increase in temperature of the same magnitude that we are talking about is going to happen in 1 century, which is very, very fast. So we expect that this will have a major, major impact on life on Earth as we know it.
At the United Nations, the UN Environmental Program is trying to arouse global concern about the harm that man is doing to the planet. They're driven by scientific concern about what we're doing to our environment, to the ozone layer, and to the tropical rainforests.
When you destroy a rainforest, you are destroying the habitat of some animals and plants, many of which we don't even know. We are not only doing something unethical, because what gives us the right to kill another species, a living species, but we are doing something stupid. We are doing something which potentially will impact on us. Much of the medicine that we use for ourselves is derived from plants, especially plants from tropical rainforest. And when you destroy a species of plant, you potentially destroy something which may be very useful to us for medical purposes, not to mention agricultural purposes.
The dinosaurs were not the first creatures of time to become extinct, nor, scientists say, will they be the last. But surely man must learn something from the fate of predatory Tyrannosaurus rex.
We have an enormous amount of technology at our disposal to change the planet. And no other species of animal, even as predatory as the Rex was, ever had the kind of technology. It only has its teeth. We have much more than that. When we were talking about nuclear war, you were potentially talking about the extinction of planet Earth. We have at our disposal ways of cutting down forests faster than they can rejuvenate themselves. We can create deserts by overexploiting the land. We can pollute waters, be they fresh or sea waters, to such a degree that life is not possible in them anymore. All of that is due to technologies. And I think if we do not get a handle on these technologies, if we don't make these technologies safe for the environment, benign for the environment, this is where the planet really stands to suffer. It's not to disappear.
Within the last 2 centuries, we've seen bison almost disappear. The swift fox is maybe going to leave us. Tigers and elephant species are fast disappearing. They may be gone within the next few decades. All of those changes induced by us through hunting and through collapse of ecological habitats are happening so quickly that geologically all this is instantaneous. How much more we allow to go extinct is within our control in part. We have a planet for the taking. We have a planet for the coexisting with too.
Perhaps more research will enable these creatures of time to teach us some lessons of how we can protect Earth's future. They may be the best teachers too, for with each generation, one subject that continues to excite and mystify is the dinosaur.
So look for more ribs to put with those ribs, and that will help.
At 10 tonight, trace the course of the Hudson River from the Adirondacks to the New York Harbor on the Hudson Chronicle. At 11, State House correspondents join Michael Aaron for a scrutiny of Governor Jim Florio's first 2 months in office. Don't miss Reporters Roundtable, only on NJN.